Welcome to our third video in our series on cost estimation and cost behavior. In this video, we'll be looking at our fourth method of estimating costs, the Highlow method. So we will once again recap the 6 steps of estimating our cost equation. These steps should be performed every time we are trying to estimate costs. We will then consider what exactly the Highlow method is. Then we will look at the advantages and disadvantages of this method. Finally, we will work through an example for the Highlow method and compare the outcomes of the Highlow method to the outcome of the scatter plot we saw in our previous example. So let us quickly recap our steps to estimate the cost function. Remember that we first need to identify the cost that we are trying to predict. We then need to select a variety of potential cost drivers. Once we have identified these, we can collect our data. We can then plot the data onto a graph to visualize it and confirm if we have a linear relationship. We then estimate the cost function using one or more of our techniques. In this video, we will be using the Highlow method. Finally, we can test the reliability of our cost functions to see how well they perform. Again, since the Highlow method is not a statistical method, we do not have a specific measure of reliability, and we will have to test reliability in the same way we did for the inspection of accounts and scatter plots. So what is the Highlow method? It is basically a method that uses only the highest and lowest activity points to derive the cost equation. So I have made some steps here for this method, which we will work through in our example just now. First, we want to identify the highest and lowest activity points. Importantly, we are looking at the activity levels, or X variable, rather than the cost. Once we have identified these points, we calculate the slope or gradient of the curve by taking the change in the Y variable, or total cost, and dividing it by the change in the X variable, or activity level. Once we know the slope, we can substitute in either the highest or lowest point into our equation in order to calculate the y-intercept, or our fixed costs. Now we have both our slope and y-intercept, so we can form the cost equation. So remember here that we are only using 2 points. This fact leads us to our advantages and disadvantages. Because all people using this method would identify and use the same 2 points, everybody should come up with the same cost function. Therefore, this method is objective. It is also quick to calculate and easy to use, as we are basing the entire calculation on just 2 observations. On the disadvantage side, we see some real problems. The first is that it only uses the highest and lowest points. These 2 points are at the extreme ranges of the activity levels and are unlikely to represent normal operations. Rather, they most likely represent outliers, which could skew our cost estimation. Also, because it only uses the 2 most extreme observations, we are ignoring all other observations and essentially discarding valuable data. These 2 disadvantages result in an increased potential for misrepresentation. Now let us move on to an example for the Highlow method. Again, we'll go across to Excel so that we can see how spreadsheet software can help us. We will look at the same example that we had for scatter plots. What we have here is the repairs and maintenance costs and related activity levels of machine hours for the last 12 months. Remember that machine hours represents our X, or independent variable, while maintenance cost represents our Y, or dependent variable. I have also included our scatter plot and the cost function we developed in our last video. This will help us to compare the lines we come up with at the end of this example. So let us get into the Highlow method. Remember, the first thing we need to do for this method is identify our highest and lowest activity points. So we go to our machine hours and we look for the biggest and smallest number. Now one option is to just look at the data and hope we don't miss anything. Alternatively, we could use the sort function on Excel. How do we sort in Excel? We can highlight our data, and then we can go to the editing section of the home ribbon. And we can select the drop down on sort and filter. Now some tips for sorting. Our first tip is that we want to keep our data together. So we must highlight all the data being the period, the machine hours, and maintenance cost. If we don't include period, it will only sort the machine hours and the maintenance cost. And our data will no longer be linked to the period in which it was incurred. Watch what happens when I do this. Remember firstly that period 1 has total machine hours of 400 and a cost of 2,100. So if I select only the machine hours and maintenance costs, I then click on sort and say sort from smallest to largest. Note that period 1 is no longer associated with the 400 hours. It is now associated with 100 machine hours and 1,200 Rand as the maintenance cost. I can no longer remember which activity levels and costs go in which period, which may be important for us in different types of analyses. So let us undo that. The second tip is that the option of smallest to largest and largest to smallest work only on the first column. So if I highlight my data and I select sort from the smallest to largest, you will notice that nothing has happened. This is because it is sorting based on the period column, which is already smallest to largest, being 1 to 12. If I select largest to smallest, then we see that it swaps the period column around. Notice also that period 1 is still associated with the 400 hours and the 2,100 Rand total cost. So our data has stayed together. So what do we actually need to do to sort this based on the number of machine hours? What we need to do is under sort and filter, we need to click on custom sort. Notice that the my data has headers box is ticked. This is important as I included the title on the columns when I highlighted them. Now under the custom sort, I can change the column on which it is sorted from the period to the activity level of machine hours. I also have options for what to sort on and in what order, but the settings currently selected are suitable for my purposes, and I can select OK, and my data is now sorted based on machine hours. It is now very easy to see the lowest and highest points. My lowest point was in month 5 with 100 machine hours, while my highest point was in month 4 with 900 machine hours. Now these form our 2 points. So point 1 is 100 machine hours at a cost of 1,200 Rand. Point 2 is 900 hours at a cost of 3,400 Rand. To calculate the slope, we can simply take the difference in our Y variable, or our costs, and divide it by the difference in our X variable, or our activity level. We can increase the decimals, and we see that we arrive at an answer of 2.75 Rand per machine hour. Remember now that our cost function takes the form of y is equal to bx plus a. We already now have the value of b, so we can substitute this in and we can say y is equal to 2.75 x plus a. We now substitute either the highest or lowest point into this cost equation. Let us use our lowest point. So our lowest point, the y value is 1,200 Rand, which will then be equal to the 2.75x, and x, remember now, is our machine hours of 100 plus a. We can now calculate our y-intercept or fixed cost by solving for a. So we can do that as 1,200 minus the 2.75 multiplied by 100. And we arrive at a fixed cost of 925 Rand. This allows us then to have our Highlow cost equation as y is equal to 2.75x plus 925 Rand. And we can make that in green so it is easily distinguishable. Now let us plot this curve on the graph. So we can do this by estimating all the costs for the different activity levels using the cost equation. We can do this in the next column. We can say that y is equal to the 2,75 multiplied by the activity level of machine hours plus the 925. If we do this for the first one, we can then drag the equation from the cell's bottom right-hand corner to all our other data points, and it will automatically calculate it for us. We now need to add these points to the graph. To do this, we can click on the graph and go to the Chart Design ribbon. Under the Data section, we can click on Select Data. Now we need to click this up arrow over here, and we can highlight our new data set, including our Highlow estimates. Once we have selected our data, we can again click on this down arrow, and you will now see that we have a series 2, and our graph has a bunch of orange dots on it. We can then click OK. Now what we want is we want a line graph that is green to match our cost equation below over here. So we can click on the chart again and select the series 2 data points. Still on the Chart Design ribbon, under the Type section, we can click on Change Chart Type. We can then select the Combo section at the bottom, where you can see that both series are currently shown as scatter. We want our series 1, which is our original data, to remain as a scatter plot. However, we want to change our series 2, our Highlow estimate, to a scatter with a straight line, which is this option over here. We can then click OK. And you'll see now that we have a straight line showing. If we click on the line, we can then go to the Format ribbon, and we can go to the Shape Styles section, and we can change the color of the line to green, and we can change the weighting to make it more visible. Now let us compare our two lines, which are the scatter plot, which remember was our best guess at the line, and the Highlow method, which only uses 2 points. What we see is that the lines are quite different. From the graph and cost function, we see that the y-intercept or fixed cost is higher for the Highlow method. However, we also see that the slope or variable cost is lower. The consequence in this example is that in lower levels of production, the scatter plot cost equation will give us lower costs. However, at higher levels of production, the Highlow method will give us lower costs. This shows how our product costing or our budgets may be inaccurate if we use an invalid cost function. So in our next video, we are going to look at what could be considered as the most theoretically accurate method, regression analysis. We will then compare our scatter plot and our Highlow curves and see the differences in the outcomes between the three models. Thank you for joining us.